Okay, so welcome everybody. I know we still have some people that are making their way over from the Indy City Games event in our Day of Chicago Game Dev Goodness. So I'm Sherry Rubin. I'm on the board of directors for IGDA Chicago. We're very excited to have two of the industry's top game designers here who were kind enough to make a swing through our Stanley Cup winning city to join us for this very special event. So today's meeting is a little different format from our average panel or lecture. We're going to start by giving some brief introductions from our guests and then move on to questions that were submitted by you. And then we'll open the floor after that and try and get through as many other questions as we can before we're out of time. This allows you to get a chance to learn a variety of topics instead of just one. So first, introductions. I'm going to ask Brenda and John to give us some brief introductions for everyone, goes over a brief snapshot of their game dev background and what they're currently passionate about, either games or otherwise. But I'd like to switch things up. So John, I'd like you to introduce Brenda, and then we'll have Brenda introduce John so we can learn about you, but from the other person's perspective.
Don't forget about the part where I made June.
Throws off the elevator pitch.
Yeah, it does.
No, that's great.
Brenda entered the game industry when she was 15 years old by going into a women's bathroom at school and giving a girl a cigarette that worked at Surtec. Because she played D&D, she got hired at Surtec and started there in 1981 and has been making games ever since, mostly RPGs for 20 years, working on the original Wizardry that was released in 81 all the way up to Wizardry 8, which she was the lead game designer on. And she worked at Atari as well. Was it in Maryland?
Mm-hmm.
In Maryland? D&D Heroes, right?
Yeah.
And Def Jam Icons, and then she worked on. Then she actually created her own games. She's actually a little bit more famously known for her Mechanicas a Message series, which includes Train and Shiakon Lot, Mexican Kitchen Workers, City Soleil, The New World. There's one more.
There's 50,000.
Oh yeah, and One Falls for Each of Us, which is actually going to be renamed maybe. And we started a social game company together. We worked together at a social game company where we made Ravenwood Fair, and then started a social game company called Loot Drop in January of 2011. And so we were interested in the social game design patterns and started a company to do that. And we actually still have Loot Drop, and she's working with UC Santa Cruz, which I'm doing the same thing, but I'm trying to just introduce her. And she's interested in all kinds of games, so she's not limited to just RPGs, obviously.
And Brenda, you want to introduce John then?
Yeah, that was a pretty good job. So let's see. I don't have a good embarrassing start in a bathroom story for you, unfortunately. So I wrote my master's thesis on John, so I could go on most of the day, but I won't. So John was actually a kind of freakish child prodigy, really. He started coding in assembly language at 11, as most of us did. When his family moved to England, he worked for the Air Force at the age of 14. They brought him in when his teacher on the Air Force Base found out how well he could code. They brought him in to code confidential, top secret stuff, except they just kept this part of it. He couldn't know that part, so he was coding for the Air Force at the age of 14. Right? 14?
I think it was 15.
He meant 14. So he was coding for the Air Force at the age of 15, as I was about to say before you interrupted me. So he was coding for the Air Force at 14. So he wrote 36 games. This I do know before he actually got published. Wolfenstein, Doom, and Quake, for which he's the best known. And he did level design, half the code, and all kinds of other stuff, sound design, art design. For those. Those were 64th game?
Yeah, something like that.
And he has published 135 games now, 40 tools, and has probably at least 30 unpublished games. Currently coding on the Corona SDK, working on relaunch of Dangerous Dave, just so he can get his feet wet. And then he has 2 other games that he wants to make. In terms of games that you He said he's interested in all games which he believes are the most fun between the hours of 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. Current addictions, I would say, is FTL, playing a lot of Dodger Down lately, which is an iOS game, Minecraft, and you have 5 level 80 pluses in WoW, and a couple characters that are smaller. You played WoW every day for 5 years, every night. Other passions, there are only 3: metal music, his 1969 Roadrunner, which he's ridiculously passionate about, and Mexican food, probably all in equal order.
Great. So, so the first question is for both of you, so you can each answer it if you want. If you could go back and change one level or mechanic or one feature in any of your games, what would you change and why would you change it?
I would fix the AI in Daikatana.
Well played.
Except that I would have actually, the better decision is to actually hire people that had made a game before to actually make the game. Nobody on that team had ever made a game before, except for me.
If I could change one thing, so there was this really stupid thing in a game I did. It's funny because I think, God, Sherry, I knew asking questions from you would be more dangerous than. So it's funny because I actually think I shouldn't have taken over the lead role on a particular game. So I would want to just sort of say, no, I'd take it if I could change the core of the game. So it was Playboy in the core of the game. When you think about, I want to be Hugh Hefner, odds are you're not thinking, and I want to run his magazine empire. There are probably other things about Hugh Hefner's life. Not that he's 80 now, pretend he's not 80, right? But there's other things about his life that are much, if your games are about living the fantasy, publishing magazines is the #1 fantasy people have of Hugh Hefner. But when I took over the lead role on the game, that's what the core of the game was. So I've sort of thought years since, when people opened up the game and thought, wait, what's happening? That they immediately felt some degree of disappointment. So I would change the core of the game. That would be the one thing I regret.
Great. So our second question is for Brenda, and not surprisingly revolves around Train. So the question that was submitted was, your game Train is an amazing game that does what many games, analog and digital, have a hard time doing. It evokes emotion. Were you trying to design a game that would touch the player on that level so powerfully, or were you shocked at the response by players when they began playing?
If you don't know about Train, I could spoil it or not. So Train deals with, I won't spoil it. Okay, so Train deals with a very difficult historical subject. All the games in the Mechanic and the Message series deal with a difficult historical subject, largely because I wanted to see if it could be done. Some of you sing or write poetry. I'm sure you've sung a song or written a letter or drawn something that you're not intending to be on display the next day. So I wasn't even expecting anybody to know about these games at all. But I just wanted to see if I could capture emotion in game mechanics the way that a photograph can capture emotion. So I was intending to do that, but I wasn't intending for the game to ever be even known about. That whoever asked that question first, thank you for the compliment. But I wasn't intending for anybody to know about it. In fact, I agreed to talk about it at a tiny little conference as a promise to a friend of mine who was a game designer who said I needed to talk about it. And it was a room where there were maybe 20 people. But when I talked about it, somebody started to cry, and there was a reporter in the room who wrote about it. And it was, in fact, on my way to Chicago that I called John saying, can I swear?
Yeah.
Okay. And when I called John and said, holy shit, there's an article on Train. Like, people know about it. And I thought I was going to be blackballed out of the game industry. I was really, because people don't make games about really difficult historical subjects like the ones that I was tackling. But it ended up being probably the game that to use Noah Falstein's statement, he said, you're probably better known and more respected for those games than you are for the wizardry games you worked on. And since I'm a huge fan, I wasn't the lead designer on all the wizardries, but I'm a huge fan of those. So that was a huge compliment to me.
Great, and then there's a follow-up question to that, which is, what are some ways that you feel designers can start tapping more into the human heart and soul with their games? How can they start, working on invoking that emotion?
Make games for themselves and not for publishers. I'm positive, the game that started all this was, the game that started the whole series was The New World, which I made about the Middle Passage for my daughter. Because she was just treating the Middle Passage like some black people went on a cruise, right? And so I wanted her, these are her relatives, these are her ancestors, right? In part, her dad is black. And so I can't imagine going to a publisher and saying, I would like to make a game about the slave trade that'll make kids cry and think about, and get all anxious, realizing that if their brother and sister they were all kidnapped to go on a boat, that they may never see their brother and sister again, which would make them cry. But I'll tell you something, my kid got, she got more out of that single game that we played that I just made up on the spot. She got more out of that than she got out of a month of Black history. It was in February, in school. So, I don't know, games that we look at them as if they can only evoke either fear or ha-ha fun, or just, ooh, excitement of some type. But they can, they can do everything a movie can do, everything a book can do. And I've completely forgotten the question now, so maybe I answered or maybe I didn't. Oh wait, what can game designers learn? Yes, so don't go through a publisher. I don't know, try to make one of these games on your own. Find a topic that you think nobody would make a game about that, and do it. I spent, the game that I'm working on right now, One Falls for Each of Us, now we're going to New York, so for a while. So it'll probably take me another year to make it, which is 5 years for a non-digital game. It has 50,000 pieces, which I'm sure nobody wants to publish that game. And it wouldn't matter if they did, because it'll just be one of them. But I just think making games, like, see if you can find a system. In every human-on-human tragedy, there's a system, because it can't happen without that. Like something like slavery, something like the Trail of Tears, like illegal immigration, all that stuff can't happen unless there's a system that fully supports it. And a game is nothing more than a system. And prepare to be sad. When I'm working on these games, like I'm reading some stuff about Wounded Knee and about the last parts of the Trail of Tears, and it's every page. John knows when I'm reading it because I'll flip a page and go, oh my God, just like, can you just listen to this stupidity? Like Andrew Jackson is my current enemy #1. But just the currency, it's just stupidity, page after page of stupidity that somehow I'm going to try to turn into a rule set. We'll see how that works. But anyway, so just prepared to be shocked at what human beings do. Doesn't that make everybody want to run out and make one of these games? Yes. But anyway, if you don't feel it, it's just like if you're having fun. I swear this will be the shortest answer ever. If you're playing a game and your goal is that the player has fun, and you're not having fun while making it and playing it yourself, your player's not going to somehow have it. So likewise, you need to feel while you're making the game the change you want to affect in the player. Right? So if you want to make the player feel complicit in something, you need to feel that as you're working on it yourself. So however you want them to feel, you need to feel while you're making it. Otherwise, it's just going to be false and it's not going to come through. Maybe that was the short version of the answer you originally asked.
Thank you.
Chat.
Brenda's a talker just like I am, so I can't falter for that. So this next question is for John. Many people obviously credit the real start and mainstream acceptance of the first-person shooter game with you, with id, with Wolfenstein 3D, and Doom. Some of our audience talked about sneaking into friends' houses to play the game, and others in our group posted photos of their game discs of Doom. So how does it feel to know people say you are in part responsible for creating the first-person shooter game genre that's so prevalent in our industry today? And do you feel that puts any added pressure on you when you start to attempt something new?
Well, it feels pretty cool to have made those games because it was really fun doing it. And it was really an evolution. It wasn't like, boom, all of a sudden we just made something, there were first-person games that came before we made Wolfenstein. They just weren't really high speed, and they were arcade games, with hardware. So when we started with our first game, Hover Tank, we just had filled polygon walls, and we were just trying to have a decent frame rate and just barely understanding how to do something three-dimensional on the screen. In fact, in January of '91, John Carmack had made a 3D cube basically rotate on the screen. That was the first thing he'd done in 3D, so he wanted to kind of pursue that more. And then in May of '91 was when we made Hover Tank. And back in '91, we made games in 2 months. So we were just like, bam, bam, bam. They're coming out really fast. We're actually making 2 games at once sometimes. So in 1991, we made 11 games, and out of those 11 games, 2 of them were 3D games, first-person games. And Hover Tank was the first one, and then the second one was Catacomb 3D, which came out in November of '91, and that actually had texture mapping in it, but it was an EGA. So if any of you ever learned how to program an EGA, it was not fun. It's a very hard video mode to program, and we did texture mapping in it, which is nightmarish. VJ was much easier to program, and that was super great. Doing Wolfenstein in VJ was a lot easier. But we learned a lot programming those games, how to resolve the math when you get too close to a wall, that the pixels are not swimming around. Just how do you get pixels looking perspective correct. And so it was a lot of development on that stuff. And then Wolfenstein was, really helped us figure out, what is the goal of this game really? It seems like it's speed and shooting stuff and having really great feedback, because we added a lot of other stuff in the game and we had to pull it back and get rid of things that slowed down the point of the game. And likewise, we did the same thing with Doom. We put a lot of stuff in Doom that we pulled out because it didn't make the game any better, and it kind of made it look dumb. This is a Marine base and there's all kinds of little treasure chests and crosses and stuff everywhere. Those were not, that just looked arcadey and it didn't look cool. So we just ripped all those things out, got rid of score, got rid of lives, and I think that, partially was helpful to evolving the shooter to more of a, we're trying to make something more realistic without having these arcade trappings of lives and score and stuff. And it's all about just survival and getting through the level and just experiencing it. And then Quake was really just trying to make it a very disturbing, unsettling FPS with internet play. And so, we just focused on 3, those 3 were really the big 3. Wolfenstein with the Nazi, just basically blowing down Nazis and getting out of a castle. Doom being the juxtaposition of, we're out in space and you expect to encounter aliens. Instead, you encounter demons from hell, which is not what you ever would expect. And so each of those 3 games just had really different ideas that were not just mainstream normal. So it was fun to develop those games, and it's cool to have been there at the beginning, but I don't really feel pressure. If I was going to make another FPS, I would probably feel pressure. Okay, I'm going to make an FPS. Obviously, I know it has to be really cool. Otherwise, we don't want, we don't want to look bad. So I don't have any plans right now to do it, but I know that I'm going to do one at some point.
And so obviously, starting, basically doing stuff that wasn't kind of mainstream before. Like you said, there was first-person games, and then this was, kind of like the birth of first-person shooters. Obviously, many people now, especially those that work in, regular studio publisher deals, have hard times getting games greenlit because it's not, that genre doesn't exist. It's going to be too hard to market because we don't know where to put it. So, how do you get through that? Do you have any tips for people if they want to try and do something that's completely new to kind of?
Yeah, that's real easy. You need to be an indie to do it. That's obvious. I mean, we were indies when we started in software and made those games. No one told us. No one was giving us money to make those games.
In fact,
right?
They told you, don't stir up that World War II stuff.
Yeah, I remember telling one publisher, hey, we're going to make a game, and it's going to be like you blowing down Nazis in the Nazi fortress to get out. And they're like, don't stir up that World War II stuff. I'm like, what? Like Indiana Jones and like everything else that's popular with World War II?
And then Sierra didn't buy it.
Yeah, Sierra, I actually, one kind of unknown story from its history is that we went to visit Sierra online, which was a really famous company for a long time. And I showed Ken Williams and Roberta Wolfenstein while we were making it. It'd only been in development for a month at that time. And it was like February of 91, or 92. And so I actually showed it to him in his house. And he saw it, and he thought that was cool, but he really wanted to show me Red Baron. that he was working on, which was a multiplayer game that they were working on. It was pretty cool. And the next day they offered to buy the company for $2.5 million, just buy all of its software for $2.5 million. And we got back to Texas and we're like, yeah, oh my God, $2.5 million, that's so much. You know how long it would take to, like, you know, the amount of money that Commander Keen was making? You know how much money, you know, how long it would take to get that much money? So let's do it, and basically ask them for like $100,000 down to like do the letter of intent and everything, and then Ken was just like, never mind, forget it. And so we're like, okay, fine, let's just finish our game and put it out. And you know, that year we won the SPA award, and saw Ken Williams at the SPA thing, and he's like, I know, I made a big mistake. I should have bought you guys.
Yeah, Sherry, part of an answer to, so he doesn't say it, because so I can tell you as his spouse, the person who packs all of our stuff up when we're moving, so he takes, seriously, no joke, he takes it for granted, right? So so as a hardcore gamer, so we've known each other since '87, and as a hardcore gamer myself, like there was this, he knows, he's so sick of this story, but I opened this box up, and it just had, there's a CD with the case it was in was broken. Hi, I recognize you. So the case was busted, and I opened it up, and it just says Doom Project, and it's the complete directory dump, right, from id, or videotapes that nobody has ever seen of Quake design meetings, and I'll be like, oh my God, right? Can we watch this? Right, but he just totally,
It's full technology.
we have
Super
boxes of this stuff. So in storage, it's not in storage now, but in storage we have like Deus Ex. We have Deus Ex concept art. It's just in a bag. And he'll be like, well, where else was I going to put it? I'm like, dude, it's Deus Ex. Like, wake up. So he largely, like his, and this is, so now this is my more academic master's thesis head. Every single game, as soon as it's done, he's like, all right, next. And doesn't want to do like the obvious, well, just make a sequel, make 25 sequels to the same thing, people will buy it. He's like, done with it, next, I want to go on, I want to do the next thing. And so he's really, like, for him, let's watch Quake videos, right? But he's, you know, he's moving on. Like,
Which is funny, because if you look back at like the games before 96 at id Software, it was usually we put out a shareware version and then a retail version. So that's why there'd be like Commander Keen, and then there's Aliens Ain't My Babysitter, then there's Wolfenstein shareware, then there's Spear of Destiny retail. Doom shareware, Doom 2 retail, Quake shareware, Quake 2 retail. But that was that. I left right after Quake, and from then on it was just all retail pretty much at that point. But everybody puts out demos now, so shareware's kind of gone. But it was just like, the only reason there were two of them were sequels because there was another market that we could hit. We could be in the store and we could sell it ourselves. Boom, start making the next intellectual property. And so that's why, like in '91, we made 11 games. They're all different games. They're all different intellectual properties. And then we kind of slowed down because it took longer to make bigger, cooler games like Wolfenstein. It was a 6-month game. And Doom was a year, and Quake was a year and a half. And then, you know, just kind of slow down the bigger and tougher the problem got. But it was always just make the next cool new thing, not like let's keep on doing sequels and stuff.
Like, I know on the way here, I know when he's quiet in the car, it's because he's working on the game he's currently designing. Right?
Yeah, which is totally different
Yeah.
different than anything I've made before.
Okay.
In fact, yeah, so just one more thing. I'm known for like shooters, but I've made like 100-something other games. Other than that, I mean, Heretic and Hexen are shooters, but before that, the whole 80s were not shooters.
Okay, so this question can be for both of you. If you have a prototype that you feel confident about, what steps do you take next to move forward with moving it towards development?
Well, I mean, to me, a prototype is development. I
We usually don't ever do that. We actually just start making the
Make it.
game. Don't waste any time.
Yeah, I think so. At some point, once the game starts to get some legs underneath it, so it's playable, I'll always talk. Like, I'll talk about the early design. We're radically different designers. So John will start just talking about a game design in front of people. You know, so I have an idea for a game and this, and he's making it up as he goes. And I'm very much a closed designer. Like, I don't want to talk about it until I feel that I know exactly what I'm making, like all of it, and I don't even want to talk about any part of it. For no reason other than pure stupidity, right? That if somehow I say, so then this and then this, and you go, oh, I don't know if this is going to work. Somehow the idea is going to blow up in my head and it's not going to work.
It's going to change your design process because there's some interference.
Something weird, right? But I'm trying to, but I'll talk with him, and I'm trying to change that, in part because my job is game designer in residence, right? And so just imagine this is the worst game designer in residence ever. Can we talk to you about your game? No, right? You can, now it's done and I'll talk about it, right? Like you can't function that way. So I have to change, and I think it's a good thing. And now, of course, I completely forgot the stupid question. I also apparently have contracted some kind of mental illness on the way here. What was the original question?
How do you take like the prototype, where you think it's playable?
Well, I forgot everything. Okay, so I'll generally just start playing it. We do a process. You just go through and make it once it's running. I think one of the most valuable things we do is something we call a design collapse, which is basically attacking the game.
Design compression. Yeah.
Compression, yeah. So for instance, a recent one we did was on a game John was working on, and we had me and Tom Hall and John in a room, and for I guess probably a day and a half, and we just mercilessly beat up the game.
Removed like most of the UI, which was great. Got rid of some features, but modified the features just so they'd still be in there in a different way because it needed to be easier. The game needed to be simpler to play, and so remove UI as much as possible.
Do you really need 5 steps to do this, or can it be done in one? And the answer is it can always, and it should always be done in one step. So just, mercy killing's the law when it comes to design. But yeah, just playing them. And also, Mexican Kitchen Workers is in its 4th iteration, and I killed it entirely. I'm still going to make the game.
Not the same.
It's not the same. I basically created an interesting math problem that yes, the system of illegal immigration absolutely favors exploiting people who come across the border. So yay, I solved a math problem, and nobody fell to the slightest bit. John's family is Mexican, and I don't know that if you played my game, you would walk away with it with any sense of how wonderful Mexican culture was, or any feeling at all whatsoever, except like, oh, look, there's math involved, which is not what I don't think your family would be like, excellent, Brenda. When I think Mexican, I think math involved, excellent. I think food is what I think.
But prototypes are usually something that publishers kind of put on a dev team. They're like, we want to see a prototype. And
proof of concept.
Yeah, proof of concept or whatever, which I don't like. That just wastes time getting the game done. But if we don't have a publisher having us do stuff, we make the game. And before you start on it, obviously you need to see the whole game in your head. Otherwise, you shouldn't be making anything. But when you see the whole game in your head, then you know basically how to start making it. And so why would you waste time making a prototype when you already know what the game's going to be like? So for all of my games, until getting to a point where a publisher ever wanted a prototype, which was, the end of the 90s or 2000s or something, has always been, all right, here's the game, bam, start making it. And at id or earlier, it was always a month or 2 months and the game's finished. You don't have time for prototypes. You just make it.
With RPGs, we did. We would do prototypes for those, but you can. I mean, there's well established.
It's not done in 2 months. They're making them in 2 months.
Oh God, no, 2 years, 3, 4.
Okay, so we have some non-game related questions as well that people want to talk. So Brenda, besides your love for shoes, it's apparently become apparent that you really love Mexican food and mariachi buns.
I do.
And so the question was, what would you say makes up the key components of a great mariachi band?
Oh my God, that's a fabulous question. The key components of a mariachi band, first of all, they need to be able, so you understand that this isn't, I'm a full-on Irish heritage, so hopefully I'm going to pronounce all these things right. They need to be able to play a cumbia. They absolutely have to do that. They have to be able to dance. A mariachi experience, where we go to see mariachis when we're at home, is in a Mexican neighborhood, in a Mexican restaurant where all the kids and people bring their family. I don't enjoy seeing mariachi bands at, say, I'm sure they would never pay at Chipotle, but I wouldn't enjoy that. I want to see, mariachi bands are a huge part of Mexican culture. And so If you remove part of a culture and sort of put them out like, oh look, it's a mariachi band playing in the Smithsonian today, right? You'll see people step, that was a fabulous, good job, right? Whereas I want to see people standing up like, screw the food, I'm going to stand up and start dancing, I'm going to start singing with them. And so to me, that's the most fun. Yet a very little known fact, John's dad was a mariachi. He sang with Mariachi Cobre out of Tucson, Arizona. And so, but I love cumbias. I just recently found out, oh my God, I found out my favorite song that I've been requesting ad nauseum, which is Camerones Palau, right? Yeah, is actually a metaphor for something sexual. I just found this out. Nobody tells me these things, right? So I've been asking mariachi bands, I'm probably blushing, to just play. I've been basically requesting things of mariachi bands, and I'm somewhat mortified by now. But I do understand that they target me, right? They know when they come in, they're like, oh, there she is, and yeah. So and there's this guy in the market. So it's so funny. We actually have our favorite mariachi band and our second favorite mariachi band. But our favorite mariachi band, there's a guy in the band, and I say to John, he will be at your funeral. Like, he is waiting, he will be there, and he winks at me, right? I'm like, he's just waiting to take your place. But he's, the whole band, so that's, they're Mariachi Perla out of San Jose.
But there's like 11 of them.
There are.
They're all at once.
Yeah.
Lots of violins and trumpets and
we brought them to our
guitars
house multiple times, because why not? If you're going to have a party, it's important to have mariachis there. So yeah, they have to be able to play that. They have to have a great vocalist who can sing Malagueña Salarosa, which is my favorite mariachi song. If you haven't heard it, it's amazing. This is the only time anybody's ever asked me a mariachi question at a game dev event. But yeah,
great.
I have an unnatural obsession
Roll
with
the dice on
mariachis.
the question.
Yeah, I have an unnatural obsession with mariachis. When we went to Mexico, I mean, what's funny though? In Brazil, I don't fly. And so, which may seem completely unrelated, but in Brazil, they really wanted me to go there, and they've invited me year after year after year. And this year, they said, we will hire mariachis. We will have mariachis meet you at the airport if you would just please fly. So people are now using mariachis to get me there. And I'm still not going to go because, we can go to Mexico, and we know.
You have to take a boat to Brazil to basically do that.
Yeah, but I would take a boat if there were mariachis on the boat to Brazil.
Okay, so then the next one is for John. So I know Brenda briefly mentioned how ridiculously obsessed you are with the Roadrunner. That same car was actually featured in a backer update earlier this year for Double Fine's Broken Age behind the scenes videos. So the question is, out of all the cars you've owned, which one is your favorite and why?
We termed that when John Romero almost killed Adventure Games. He terrified. Tim Schafer got back, his hair was all fucked up. Right? He looked like he'd just seen God. And then when he got out of the car, he said, I feel it just like this. And if you know Tim Schafer, he's a gentle, funny guy. And he said, I feel like God just punched me in the face. So John tried to kill Adventure Games. I'll let you answer the question.
Which one was most fun?
Which one's your favorite and why?
Favorite? Well, I think probably the Roadrunner is. I had a Testarossa that had a huge turbo on it. It's a 12-cylinder engine, giant turbo, and nitrous on it. And the first time I used the nitrous, it basically blew all the exhaust, basically the exhaust valves out the back of the car. And then it's like test run, ting, 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 and then $12,000 later, knew everything inside the car and don't do the nitrous. And it was a really fast car, it was really cool, and I had a 348 that looks like a mini Testarossa, kind of. But the Roadrunner is just awesome because it's an American muscle car, and it's a 426 engine that's been bored out to 572. There's no turbo or supercharger or anything on it. It's already insane, and it's you hit the gas when you're going in a straight line. You don't turn corners when you're going really fast. And it just sounds cool, it looks cool, so I'd have to say that's my favorite. I had a Lotus before, and that was probably the weakest one. Testarossa was the second. second best. Had a BMW 840, which is a 12-cylinder sports car. I've had like probably 40 cars, something like that, but my favorite's the Roadrunner for cool muscle car, fast, sounds cool, looks cool kind of thing. And they're not all over the place, which is kind of important. Like we have cars that you don't see everywhere. So I like not seeing the same thing I'm driving going down the road. So, Roadrunner.
Thank you. So getting back to games, this is a question for both of you. Do you ever get designer's block, kind of like writer's block when working on a game? And if so, how do you get yourself out of it?
I don't. There's just, it's like infinite possibilities, and like which one do you want to use?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I'd say if there were just one game you were making, like how are you going to, there's always, I think the answer actually for both of us, I'm contradicting what just came out of his face, is probably yes, right? Like I don't, because I've heard you say, I'm not sure how I'm going to solve that yet, but there are 12 other problems, right? So that one will resolve itself while working on this one. But I've never, like, so Mexican Kitchen Workers, I don't know what I'm going to do with that game, right? So that has an actual block, but I don't care because I'm working on this game right now, and I think that whatever I'm doing here will inform whatever it is I decide to do over there. You know, if I don't know the answer yet, it's because I don't know the things I need to know yet to actually formulate the answer. So, so yeah, and I mean, there's an infinite variety of games.
Yeah, with me, I have this this memory thing called hyperthymesia, which means I remember everything I've done, and I remember all the games I've played. And so I remember how all games I've played since I started playing games have worked, and so I have like this infinite palette of game mechanics.
Which is such a cheat.
You know,
So
someone could just basically say something like, yeah, 1978 that was done.
So he remembers,
or something else.
which is horrible for arguments because I lose, right? It's actually at 5:48 p.m. you said the following. It's actually not that bad actually, but yeah. So that was actually a part of my master's thesis was this whole weird memory thing. But it's primarily it's all games, like even down to when we were setting up these little fake things to. You know, his memory's been studied since this point in time, but it was, so watch, he'll like, you say it's actually freakish. And I say to my thesis advisor, he knows the weather on the day he first played a game. And it's all games. And it started because he was being critical of me saying, like, how do you not know this? You were there. Like, you were in the industry that long.
It was in 1981.
How do you not
Seriously,
know?
it
Like,
was huge when
seriously.
it came out, you know.
Don't you remember the second level when you got 12 points for the following? No, John, I don't. I don't remember. I don't even remember my own games that well. But the best part is there's near Alzheimer's for people's names that they don't, his brain has to do with games. Yes, locked. No, gone.
Yeah.
So my sister-in-law, who hopefully will never watch this, it was just, her name is Mary? No, Marie Christine. Right, it's Donna. You know, it's 6 times. And, you know, finally on the 6th time, he got it. He remembers what he was coding when we met in 1987. Not normal.
That's why there's no designer's block.
Well, so I'm going to throw out a follow-up question then, just because I've known, obviously, you guys for a while now. Does that memory thing affect or give John an advantage when you guys are playing Ghost Recon against each other?
Well, I mean,
He's nodding, so.
yeah, right. Like, so I mean, I've killed him once in Doom, and it was a spawn kill, and I don't care. I did it. I shot him in the face, and I was as happy as I could be. In Ghost Recon, yeah, I mean, it does. I mean, it affects all kinds of things, right? Like, I would love, just imagine, really, if you could have the complete works of every game you've ever played in your head when you're designing. Like, it's like a complete fucking cheat. Right? But at the same time, so I just like, all right, so here's what I'm going to design. This is what I'm thinking. Discuss. And so I have now taken advantage of the cheat. In Ghost Recon, what he does, like I've heard him, will play with his son, my stepson, Michael, and he'll basically just, when he's playing a shooter, just in case any of you, I'm sure many of you are better than me, and have an opportunity to kill him in the future, what he does is just has, you know, he sort of hangs back and he patterns you. And he's just watching your play pattern. And then he'll say, all right, I've got it now. Like he says it out loud, I've got it. And then it all goes to hell. Yeah, so I mean, it's a complete cheat. Like he knows the levels, he plays them inside and out, he knows every single thing about it. And then for his birthday a few years ago, I got him dinner with Brian Upton, who's the designer of Ghost Recon. Here's a
Which is
Cupid
awesome,
for your
yeah,
birthday.
super awesome.
Yeah, no, actually, I'm pretty good friends with him and his wife, and we've asked them. I'm sure Brian, John will visibly fanboys Brian every time that we get together, and Brian's just always horrified. Please, just
And he's
stop.
fanboying Brenda.
Yeah. But yeah, Ghost. If you haven't played the original Ghost Recon, we are huge
On
fans of that
PC,
game.
yeah.
It's so incredibly good. But yes, this is why I suck at shooters and will die forever, basically. And every other game we play, except board games, and I can nail you there. But anyway, carry on.
Okay, so the next two questions are about coding. So John, with so many different platforms and types of games out there, if you had to suggest to someone one programming language to learn to get them started on the path of making their own games, which one would you suggest they try first?
So I have a kind of a more complex answer for this now. Before I would always kind of tell people you need to learn C++. Like in general, if you're a programmer and you know C++, you're good with allocation and you're good with pointers, then you can learn everything else, and everything else is easier to do. And you can get a job pretty much anywhere because all other programming languages are pretty much easier if they're procedural. And so I've kind of evolved my, people who want to get into the game industry, what should they do for programming? I believe that everyone should program no matter what, just at different levels. So there are people who want to be very technical and they want to write their engine and they want to do it all themselves. They don't want to really use any off-the-shelf stuff. They just want to know how to write all aspects. They want to write the network code, the graphics code, because doing that will make them feel like they wrote the whole thing, and it might get them more excited and go deeper about one of the disciplines, one of the subjects that they're writing. And so that's one path that I've seen a lot of people take. They learn C, then C++, and then they basically start writing the entire game themselves, or they're on a team where they're all pretty much hardcore wanting to do that. And that's one path. And if you're going to go that path, where you want to be a pretty technical person, learn C++, and you'll probably end up, if you want, write middleware, write an engine, start licensing stuff, be an engine programmer on a team, kind of go that route if that's what your interest is. Then there's people who are more like, I want to make a game, and I want to do it in 3D, and I want to be kind of technical, not like the crazy dudes that are writing the engines. And then I basically tell those people you should probably do Unity because there's good complexity in Unity. I'm not really a fan of C#, but it gets the job done, and you can make some really great stuff in Unity, and it's cross-platform, which is nice. Versus the people who are writing their own engine have to actually write their entire abstraction wall and implement every platform's native part of the engine themselves. That's a lot of work. That's why these middleware companies exist. But people that want to get a game out there and have it on multiple platforms, they want it 3D, or they just want to be a little more technical about it, Unity is really kind of that path. Then people who don't want to code so much, they don't want to really dive into real technical stuff, but they want to make a game, and the game is the focus, and they want to work on design, a lot of design, see the game really quickly, do it in 2D because they want to do it mobile, etc. I point them towards Corona SDK, which uses Lua as the programming language, which is just derivative of C. And Corona is amazing because you can basically get a game up and running, a real simple game up and running in just a few hours, because it basically does what Unity does when you're trying to do 2D in Unity with the orthographic projection. It removes all of that complexity. There's no real Z, it's just 2D. And so the order that you kind of draw things on the screen is the Z order that you're dealing with. And it does it very quickly. They have shaders, they have all kinds of cool stuff. The pre-programmed shaders, so you don't even need to know any shader language. And the Lua is really fast, and it's for iOS, Android, Nook, and Kindle, and they're working on OS X and Windows desktop. So you know, Corona is really amazing if you ever download it and go click the demo button when you run it, so you can look at, like, here's a line of code and here's what it does.
Even if you're not a coder.
Even if you're not a coder, you can look and like load a PNG, add it, make it a physics object, watch it fall down and hit the ground and stuff in like 2 lines. So it's really amazing, and it's a full language. It's not like Game Maker where you can only make games that Game Maker will allow you to make. It's like this is a full anything you want to do. If you want to make World of Warcraft 2D, you can totally do it.
Or an app.
And
You don't even, it doesn't even have to.
or apps, yeah, business apps or tools or whatever. It's got a whole part of it that's just doing apps. It has nothing to do with game stuff. So I kind of recommend that to people who want a game out. They want to make a game and they want to see it out quickly and decide that they want to go a little more technical later and just kind of get experience publishing, in-app purchases, you know, all that, you know, the marketing stuff maybe, but really focus on just getting a game out and kind of getting into the game industry a lot easier in programming than people who think that, like, oh man, I gotta break my head open and learn all this crazy 3D math and everything. You know, this is the whole, like, no you don't. Just go over here, you'll get a game out faster than someone who's a really great programmer doing it all themselves. You'll get something out way, way faster.
So before I get to the next question, I'll go off of that. So Corona's actually been partnering with IGDA on a few things. We did a thing with GDC, and right now, up until I believe July 12th, anybody that joins or renews as a IGDA member or as a lifetime member gets 3 months of Corona Pro for free.
Wow.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So if you want to take your first 3 months and figure out how awesome Corona is, this is your way to do it. They're actually running a Dilbert Game Jam right now too. So
Corona Pro lets you do like in-app purchases and extra stuff, but if you don't want to do that, you can download Corona, you can use it, you can publish out on the App Store and everything. It's all free. They let you have everything for free. Just do it, and you don't need to pay them any money.
And they're super down to earth. Like they're
Yeah,
really
they're really
like,
great.
what do we need to do? Suggest things. So they seem really approachable.
And whenever they add new features, their focus is, how can this be done in one line, just dead stupid programming stuff? We do all the hard stuff behind the scenes. And the people running and who started the company were the people who worked at Adobe's program manager of Flash Mobile and left in 2007 to start this because he knew that Flash was not going to really be efficient for mobile phones and the battery life and stuff. So they basically left to start and do it over again, but do it this way. In a very, very simple fashion. So there are some similarities to Flash, but it doesn't have movie clips or anything like that. But it is a real language, and it's really, really fast, and it makes it, there's hundreds of games out there that use Corona.
So the next question about coding is actually for Brenda.
Oh God.
Well, so you kind of famously spoke at GDC one year about how game design students, or those wanting to get in the industry, need to know how to code, and
Yep.
that schools should be teaching game design students how to code
Yes.
to compete for jobs in the industry. Do you still believe that to be the case? And if so, have you seen any progress being made by educators to teach designers how to code?
So yeah, I deeply believe it. I mean, in fact, so where I'm a game designer in residence, the entire program is built on a foundation of code. And I believe it because it's what I've seen, right? I mean, I hire game designers, and when resumes come in, there's 2 piles. There's I've been in the industry, and there's I've not been in the industry. So if I'm hiring a designer, I'm gonna look at this pile first. So somebody else has tried you out, and I can hopefully see the results of your work out there. And if for some reason, and sometimes we will hire, like you want an intern. Like I know it's not easy to get into the game industry. So you want a promising intern. So let's just push the you've been in the industry pile aside. And we've hired, 6 or 7 interns. And so I'll look there. So now these guys are going into 2 piles. It's the I've made a game people, and then there's I haven't yet made a game, and I've got design documents, right? And a design document is a large collection of possible ways everything can go catastrophically wrong, right? That's all it is. It's an idea. And game design isn't like, I've got a great idea for a game. Game design is actually the execution. It's those moment to moment, should I do it this way? I'm gonna go this way. And all these decisions build up to produce this game. And so if I actually see that you've got output, and your output is a game I can actually get my hands on and I can play, I'm going to go that way versus reading through your 200-page design doc or playing your board game. And I feel like if when he was talking about this, I took a a wrong turn in college where I was taking, I actually, took an assembly language class, and if it hadn't been for David Bradley, who I consider my mentor, he was the lead on Wizardry 5, 6, and 7, great game designer. If it hadn't been for him, I never would have made it through this assembly language class. But I loved BASIC, but I just sort of at some point stopped coding, and I look at the difference. So I've been making games since '81. You've been making games since late 70s.
79.
79.
Yeah, but really, 81 is when I got to actually code one.
So there's 2 years. Well, okay, so we'll say 81 and 81. I have made 30-some games published. Well, maybe if you count all my non-digital stuff, I'm in the 40s now, versus 140-something released titles. Like, tell me code doesn't matter, right? And I was as geeky as he was. I mean, at 14, I decided I didn't like the encumbrance rules in a Rollmasters Claw Law series, right? So I rewrote the encumbrance rules. And then because I rewrote those, I needed to rewrite the movement rules. And then I also didn't like a few other things. So at the age of 14, well, I don't know what other girls were doing, because I was busy rewriting an entire role-playing game, which I wish I still had. But just like look at the difference. Like, it's just obvious to me. And you don't get better. You get better by making a bunch of bad stuff, and eventually it gets better. Like, just learn how to code and get the garbage out of the way early. I deeply regret not learning how to code, and I made a few forays into learning C. If you're planning to learn C, do not start a company and become a lead game designer in a project. It will dramatically affect your ability to code. But I'm going to be starting, so I've got the Corona SDK downloaded, and I looked through the demo, and I'm not allowing him to help me at all. So I told Corona, like, you've got, I'm technically literate, but I'm not a coder. And I super feel that way, because just getting back to this question, do you notice I'm like unfocused sometimes? Good, so do I, most of the time. Getting back to that question about should students be able to do that, I just feel like, so many colleges are charging, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a year, so you can come out and say, like, I'm telling you, if you put your money in, if you give me your money, I'm going to be able to design for you. Well, prove it. No, I have some paper, versus I will always hire the kid who is making games in spite of himself or herself. Just, here, I made these 5 bad games, and I know they're bad, but I'm gonna do this whether somebody pays me to or not. Video games are, they are all built on a basis of code, and I even notice in, working in a company, so I'm in a position now, it doesn't matter, I've made enough games, I can get jobs as lead designers and creative directors, I can be a lead on a project with zero knowledge of code. But I notice there are times when I want something, when I Ghost Recon, I was working on that, there was a point that I wanted something to happen, and I'm trying to say, well, what about if you did something, something, something? And the coder's like, oh, no, I just don't see that we could do that. So John overhears me, and he comes over, and he's having this, so we're all having the conversation, and at some point in time, this is how it felt to me. At some point in time, the conversation they started speaking Spanish, and I couldn't speak Spanish, right? So I sat there, trusting that the person who could speak Spanish was not saying, she's an idiot, just trust us, And so next thing you know, this thing that is seemingly impossible, because he is literate in code, he is able to talk to the lead coder about, what if we did it this way, or what if I made these compromises? And he doesn't suggest things. Those of you who are coders and have worked with designers have had the designer come up to you and say, I've got a great idea, this shouldn't take any time. And you're like, right, 5 months, right? And you want to
planet explodes,
right, something. But I've seen, like, I feel many times like I know that I genuinely believe I am half the designer I would be if I knew how to code. And at the same time, I'm very aware that I wouldn't have made the non-digital games that I did make if I could have coded. So I know there's like some trade-off, but I do know that, I feel my career and its potential is tremendously stagnated, because I have to go around and like basically either pay coders or beg coders or marry coders, right? Like, you got to do what you got to do. I'm kidding. But it's funny because he wouldn't make them. He wouldn't. It's funny because he knows the games that I want to make, right? And he's like, that's great, like, you know, see, and he won't do it, right? Because he's got his own game ideas.
So who here doesn't know how to code? So there's a lot of coders in the room, right? So if you don't know how to code, I would say get Corona and just try and make Pong. Don't try to make anything more complex than Pong, because it's hard enough just to do that if you haven't coded before. And then from there, you know, make Space Invaders, then make Pac-Man. And if you can make those games, you are on the way to actually making a lot of other good stuff.
I will say, having started, you know, having looked at a lot of SDKs, Corona was the first one, which is why I'm like, I don't want your help. Because I'm giving the Corona guys feedback. It's not paid. I'm just, I really, it was the first SDK that I looked at that I felt like, wait a minute, I can do this. I had my coding book taken away from me when apparently I was heading too close. Really, he took it away. I was happily reading through this book, which wasn't having me do any actual code. He said, what are you reading about now? And I said, pointers. And he went, oh, no, or something like that.
You haven't even made anything yet, and now you're going to go into pointers? This guy is all wrong.
Yeah, so yeah, anyway, that was the end of my foray into pointers. But it was the first SDK that I really looked at and felt like, no, you know what, I think I can do this. So I'm excited, actually, and I'm not going to take his advice. I'm not going to make Pong. I'm going to make this RPG-ish idea that I have. I'll fail catastrophically and go back to make Pong, but he's not going to dissuade me. I'm going to do it anyway. So everybody else take his advice, because I'm not. Go ahead. You won't save me when I fail, but that's all right.
Okay, so this next question is for both of you, and I know especially with you and wanting everybody to know their history, it's pretty appropriate. If you could sit down and talk with any game developer, alive or dead, whether to talk about the craft or just to get to know them, who would it be and why?
Can I pick one alive, one dead?
Sure.
All right, so dead would easily, hands down, no doubt about it, be Danny Berry. You may know as Dan Bunton as well, but Danny created Mule. Made, you know, oh my goodness, like, you know, somebody was talking about dynamic difficulty adjustment and they credited it in some recent game. You know, no, Danny did that in video games, you know, 7 Cities of Gold. There's just so many innovations. If you study her work, it's just first time for this, first time for this, first. In Mule, I mean, the learning curve in Mule is ridiculous, but it really set the gold bar for economic simulations. Just brilliant. And Danny, we saw Wheeler Dealers when we were at the Strung Museum of Play. You know, she was making, she wanted people to play together. This idea of one person at a computer was an aberration to her. And so she actually sold with an Apple II, like sold with a game that was for the Apple II, sold a 4-player controller. They have it at the Strong, and I've never actually seen one, so I was really excited to. But anyway, just years ahead of her time. You know, she was working on problems that we wouldn't actually care about until WoW came out. You know, so Rob Pardo, I think, was in roughly the 3rd grade when Danny was already trying to solve some of the problems that he and his team would face with World of Warcraft. And then Alive, this is going to be hysterical because I don't think I can honestly handle meeting this guy, and I'm going to. We're going to have dinner and lunch with him. It's Nasser Jabeli. Does anybody know who Nasser is?
Well, because I heard
All right,
so, you know.
So Nasser Jabeli, let me tell you, whoa, let me throw myself off the chair. Let me tell you who this guy is. So Nasser Jabeli, he doesn't use any source code. He's the sole coder of Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3. And he codes directly into the mini assembler, right? No source code. All of the code is in his head, and he has to get it out in 2 weeks, right? So Nasser, if you're ancient like I am, I'm 29 again. So Nasser, like there's so many games that I played as a kid, just, you know, programmed by Nasser, right? And nowadays, if you wonder, like Nasser and Bill Budge are the 2 guys at the basement of the industry. And everybody else, if you're like, oh, Will Wright really inspired me. Well, Will Wright was really inspired by Bill Budge and Nasser Jabeli. And if you say like, oh, you know, like the id guys, you know, like I really loved their games. They were inspired by Nasser Jabeli and Bill Budge. And Bill Budge came to our wedding, and you'd think I'd be like, it's my wedding day. And I bet I said 90 times, oh my God, Bill Budge is at my wedding. Right, like that was the thing that blew me away, was that there's Bill Budge. Like, no
Will
shit.
Wright was there too.
Yeah, but I know Will, right? Like, and so, I mean, Will's a great guy, but I've known Will for a long time, so I don't have these like, oh my God, it's Bill Budge at my wedding. And he gave us this was originally about Nasser. Anyway, so these two people at the bottom. So we're gonna actually meet Nasser Jabeli, and it's just the level of reverence, like what I've done in games, I feel like I've got like just this kind of pathetic piece of quartz that I'm trying to polish the hell out of, and maybe every once in a while somebody go, oh, a diamond, oh, it's a quartz. But I'll live for that, oh, maybe a diamond moment. But Nasser really, I mean, he's Square moved everything over here just for this guy. Just one of the super geniuses, you know, he defined so much stuff. So I don't even, you know, I really suspect that I'm just going to have some freakish reaction when I meet him. And I don't know what it'd be, exploding.
Nasser was, you know, before '87 when Final Fantasy came out, Nasser was like the god of the Apple II world back in '80 and '81. You know, he started his own company, and then he went on to do the Final Fantasy games, and he programmed Secret of Mana, and then he was done, and he's been done, you know, since '93. But yeah, he's super amazing guy, and I've interviewed him and videoed him and all that stuff. He's really cool.
Who are your two people?
Was the question for living and dead, or just?
I modified it.
You just modified it? I don't know. It's really tough because there's a lot of really great programmers, and mostly I think the things that I'm more excited about is like their design process of, you know, what made you think that, and maybe some programming stuff, but I mostly don't know how they all coded their stuff. You know, maybe Richard Garriott, I think, would probably be really interesting to talk to him about the whole Ultima series. I used to work at Origin, but I was in the New Hampshire office, not the Austin office where he worked. But I know that it would be really interesting just to talk about the evolution, the design process of, you know, Calibeth and everything. Calibeth was like dungeon number 22 or something. Like, he'd written a ton of them before.
You should know him, right? You know Richard.
Mm-hmm, yeah, I just haven't. The thing is, I know a lot of these people, but I haven't actually sat down with them for hours just to talk to them about that stuff. It's usually just, hey, what's going on and how's it going, that kind of thing. But not like, okay, let's talk about for hours about this thing, which is funny. Like, that's what I expect people to ask me about whenever they meet. They're just, you know, why don't you just ask me the questions that you might have had, you know, that you wanted to know the answer of for years, instead of nice to meet you, thanks a lot, you know, and then that's gone, you know. Getting some real, like, you know, answers or something that you can't get from an interview or whatever is more important. So, like, I do the same thing. I just meet these guys and talk to them and hang out and stuff, and don't get like the real deep answers that I want from some of the stuff that I know that they've done. So, dead? I don't know. There's not too many dead people.
There's a lot of
in
dead
game
people.
development. I didn't finish my sentence. In game development, there's not that many in game development.
They could send a live person and then fix the problem.
Yeah.
Well, there's some people that I know you're really looking for, though.
Yeah.
Like
Well, I
Larry
think,
Miller.
Gunpei Yokoi would probably be a good
God,
one, right?
yeah.
He would
Yeah,
probably be
that's
a really good
obvious.
one to talk to. I need a translator though.
Gunpei was Shigeru's mentor. If you don't know who he is, every single innovation that Shigeru has had, you can trace directly back to his mentor. All of his patterns. Gunpei Yokoi was years ahead of his time as well.
Yeah. He made the Game Boy and the D-pad. Yeah, probably those two people.
Great. So I want to give time for the audience to also ask questions. So we're going to skip to one more question that both of you can answer. If you had the time, the resources, the funding to make any game you wanted, no platform, genre, or IP, off limits, licensed, or original, what game would that be?
It's a game I want to make right now in my head. It's the not Pong game that I want to code. You know, I think, so here's what my answer would be. I think if we could do absolutely anything, and nothing, there were no holes barred, somehow somebody that it will cost $5 million to do this. Excellent, there's $5 million. I would set up a studio with all of our kids and make a game. Like his son, his son is a very competent coder. He's already working in his 5th game company, and he's just released his own game. He's basically a clone. And then Donovan, who's 8, so desperately wanted to code, he begged John to teach him at 6. And John had a very good fatherly answer, which was, you need to nail reading first. So get the reading down, and then we'll work on
You need
C.
to learn how to read before you can actually code.
Yeah, so, but he was so obsessed with coding that he so obsessed with making a game, he got a book, and he just started making the game in the book, so he didn't know what else to do. So it says things like, press P to pick up, press P to drop, and you flip the page. And it's 83 pages long, he let us know, 83 pages long. And we had a release party when he finished it. Yeah, and so they so desperately want to make a game. Maze is learning how to code. 2 of the girls, Lilia and Avalon, aren't as interested, but they're interested in different aspects of them. Not interested in coding, but if we could make a game with all of our kids, I truly cannot imagine a conceivably better thing that I would want to do. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. Mine would probably be a game that is.
So you're quitting already, my little
Yes, I'm
utopia?
out of that.
Awesome.
I'm on to the
It's
next
hard to
game
top
company
that.
already.
Isn't it? Yeah, well,
It's hard to top
Did you
the
see
answer
what
to all
he just
that.
did?
Like,
He just seriously threw his whole family under the bus. He did. Fine, screw you. We're
Game
gonna make
company
a better
number
game.
10.
Whatever. We're gonna make a better game. We don't need you.
Yeah.
We'll hire coders or something. Go ahead, carry on.
I would make a game that probably had a team size of 10 or less. If everyone in the family was really, really great. and had
Don't try to
decades of
save
fun,
yourself now.
then they'd be qualified, but they probably aren't. So anyway, it would probably be a cross between an MMO that was a shooter that was like Minecraft.
Yeah, we can't do that.
It would be something like that, where you could basically, there's a lot of, it's an MMO, so you would be fighting and you'd basically be like TF2 fighting in certain areas, but you'd also be able to configure and build and take down those areas and build new ones anywhere you wanted, kind of just create new areas of conflict. And it would be a pretty dark game probably. It would be all shiny, happy fun. It would probably be more like, Quake.
Yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily want the kids.
Yeah, you don't want them in there.
8-year-old horror nightmares. Yeah, probably not.
Okay, so I want to give the audience a chance to also ask some more questions or do some follow-ups. So there's a mic in the middle. So if you have some questions that you want to ask, just start making a line and we'll kind of go through them one by one. You can pretty much ask any question for the most part, but obviously if the NDA hammer shows up, you kind of have to respect it if they're like, I can't actually answer that question. But
We really almost have no NDA hammer right now.
Yeah, we pretty much have no idea, Hammer. And I should say I broke my toe on one foot. How is this related, Brenda? She mentioned shoes, right? So now I feel like, oh my God, I have horrible shoes on. It's because I broke my toe on one foot and then I slammed my foot into a chair on the other foot. So I'm kind of dual hobbled now. Anyway, now if you want that out of the way, why do you have shitty shoes on? There you are.
So pretty much everybody who had an x86 in the 90s played E1M1. But I've always wondered, like, what was the actual ratio turnaround to shareware and money you guys actually made on Doom?
You mean, like downloads of Doom versus how much money we got from registered?
How many
copies?
sharewares? Yeah.
Like, I mean, I can only imagine, if not hundreds of millions of copies of Doom.
Yeah, I mean, there was a
circulated.
ton of, I don't even know how many copies, because there's no way for me to know who copied what where, because we didn't like have the game send us stuff back over the modem, because it was before the internet. So there's
Hell,
no,
for your daily DRM.
I don't
Yeah.
know, other than there was the stat that, Doom was installed on more computers than Windows was at the time, and I think in '95 or something. But I don't even know how much money the game made total. We just didn't really pay attention to, at least our biz people and accountants paid attention to that, but on the development side, we only cared about making games, and as long as we had enough money to keep on making games, we just kept making them. So we didn't sit there, we don't have like these big meetings where like, let's go over the money and all that stuff. Don't care, we just want to make games. Can we buy new computers? Yes, okay. So I can't tell you how many copies were downloaded. I don't have any idea, and I don't know how much money we totally made because I didn't care.
Cool.
This is for Brenda mostly, but so when you're working on a game that has some of the serious or historical implications that you're trying to work with, if you have a mechanic that is kind of between, you're not sure if you should make it more fun or make it like a good mechanic that will make players want to play the game and then deal with the implications of that, like how do you resolve that? So, like in Train, for example. Yeah, no, definitely not. But like, there's some competitive elements that for me didn't make a lot of sense, given the content, like what the game actually is. How do you? Yeah. So I guess how do you deal with that?
So with Train, when I made the game, I tested the game with all kinds of different narratives. So this is an old argument in games, but are you a ludologist or a narratologist? Do you see games as a vehicle for stories, or are games just pure mechanics? I am shockingly on the far side of the ludology scale. They're mechanics, and I like that. So I put all kinds of narratives on top of Train. You're going to Disneyland, you're going all kinds of different places, because I wanted it to be a fun game. If it stood on its own, I want it to be a fun game. And so I just would test it like that. Now, there's another game, so the one I'm working on now about the Trail of Tears is the one with the 50,000 individual pieces. And I expect that when people see the game, that they're going to not want to play, because if you're going to play the Trail of Tears, you're going to displace 50,000 Native Americans, and I don't care if you don't like it, right? You don't want to engage, good for you. And I'm forcing people to take the role of the white man, except people who are people who were actually relocated, who were robbed of their land during the Trail of Tears. And if you are, so for instance, John is part Cherokee, so, or anybody who's Native, I thought like that's a horrible idea. So talking about this, well, what do I, so like, yes, you're Cherokee, please relocate your people, right? Like that's a horrible idea. So what I thought of instead is, since it will be this gigantic field of 50,000 little pawns, that if he wants to, he can take one of those pawns, put it in his pocket, and actually sit there in place of that. And if you're playing the game, you're going to have to actually, if you choose to engage in this game, you will have to actually ask people of actual descent, who are the people who did not die in the Trail of Tears, basically, to move, and that should make you feel violently uncomfortable, and I love that. This game isn't about this just to see it. It's not about I'm trying to this is the system that got people thinking systemically about how do we remove these things? Oh, they're people, they're families, right? And when you see this actual Cherokee sitting in the middle of a field of Cherokees, you should feel disgusted with our past as humans. And that's, of course, not the goal of a game necessarily, maybe until now. And so I recognize that sometimes I'm going to break it. There was something that I'm not going to do in Mexican Kitchen Workers that potentially could have been similar to that. And I still may do it, which is why I'm not talking about it yet. It's just, like, I'm okay if people approach. I don't want people to miss the whole point of Mexican Kitchen Workers and just like, we don't want to engage in this game because of this single thing. And I'm also respectful of not wanting to insult the culture as well. Which is why I'm not playing the role of a Cherokee, because my family was in Ireland when all that happened, but dealing with Cromwell and all that excitement, but I don't want to. It's not my culture to take. Which is why I'm going at God. I'm going all over the place with this. Let me just stop that. It's a way more convoluted question, because I'm deciding what I want to say and what I don't want to say based on where the games are at present. When the player finishes the game, I want them to feel a certain thing. And I make the decisions on whether or not I will ruin the fun based on that. I don't know, I don't believe games need to be fun. I don't feel like I go to a movie and it's got to be fun. No, I don't think anybody went into Schindler's List feeling that was going to be just a rollicking good time.
Well, in Train, people you don't have rules and stuff happening in Train that make people get all crazy happy and laughing and like, oh yeah, I really messed you up by derailing
But they
you.
do, right? Right? Like they do.
Could be, but you didn't put anything that was kind of over the top that would lessen the actual impact.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I've answered your question at all, but I'll know it's right. I mean, my job as a game designer, like 100 ideas are going to come into my head, and you know, the idea that one idea showed up, you know, if I am a member of one of those 5 tribes, do I actually have to engage in this horror? And the answer is no. You know, you actually have a privileged place in the game. So it's just a question of, as those ideas come up, am I wrecking this? Am I doing that? There is one right answer. And I always know my job is, the game is basically already done since they're just systems, and my job is to interpret the systems in a way that is respectful and ultimately will make the player feel the way I want them to feel when it's done. And if you think that sounded crazy convoluted, you should be in his shoes when I'm first talking about the idea for one of these games. It's all over the place. But they come out good, so you know, obviously I'm onto something that may make him insane at some point. He's not sorry he asked that question.
Hello. My question is for John. Basically, when you create a game back in the past, like Doom, what were some things that you would do to kind of like start yourself to create a video game, to keep yourself in a mindset to
Also, like, how did we start coming up with the idea to make something?
something more like you start programming and you kind of like, what would relax your mind, or like you put yourself into a mindset and start creating, start programming?
We would always know what we're making before we start programming. So, and a lot of times it's, you know, there's a reason why you're making the game for a certain design, but sometimes you might even be making the game because of some of the programming that you know you're going to do in it, because it might be exciting and new stuff that you haven't done before. You could choose, hey, I'm going to make an RTS, and because I've never made one before, and it'll be really exciting to come up with the, you know, real-time A-star stuff and figure that out. For example, coming up with a design, it depends on where you're at as a designer, because sometimes, like at the very beginning, there may be a lot of things that you don't know, so you're trying to figure out, just like, I guess, are you talking about the motivation for making a game, or just how do you start?
Yourself, even yourself, like you kind of sit at your desk and you kind of like
Music.
Yeah, basic stuff.
Well, there's different things. There's the beginning of the game, and then there's actually making the game that you know that you're actually working on. The beginning of the game part is just, you know, what are the influences? What do you want to make? Why do you want to make it? What's going to be cool about the game? What's going to be fun about it? And that comes from, you know, it depends on if it's just you doing it, if it's other people. If there's other people involved, obviously all of you have to get around and just start talking about it and see what you guys get excited about. So every time that we made a game at ID, like these games came out like every 2 months before we actually did Wolfenstein. So it was really kind of, we just said, it's up to you, Tom. We just made him our creative director, and it was up to him to say what we were going to make. Because we would make any of his ideas would get changed into a game, no matter how many compromises had to be made. It was going to get turned into something that, you know, was going to ship in 2 months. But then when we decided that we're going to spend more time and do bigger things, like Wolfenstein was our first really kind of big game, we knew that we wanted to use texture mapping because we just made Catacomb 3D, and that idea was Tom's idea. And that actually, the idea that Tom had for Catacomb was really taken from the D&D games that we were playing on the weekends, and a game that John had made already called Catacomb, and this is just the 3D version of Catacomb. And Catacomb was based off the 3D, or based off the D&D world. So it was like easy for Tom to just like, okay, we're gonna take what you did, and I'm gonna add a totally new story, but the same characters that we know, and it's gonna be texture mapped, so I'll come up with the items and stuff. And it was really easy to kind of come up with that laundry list. But when we were decided, okay, we're gonna do this game called Wolfenstein, well, we didn't actually come up with that. At first it was like, okay, what's our next game? We're gonna do something else, this time not for the company that we were making these games for, because all of 1991 we were making games for soft disk, And so it wasn't really our game, like we just made it and we own it and we're making all the money off of it. It's like, okay, we just made you a game, here you go, you own it, it's yours, we'll never see it again, it's gone. So the first year VID really, as a company, was making games for someone else, and we, at the same time, we had to make our own game to keep on going, like to make money and stuff, because the games that we were making for the other company hardly paid us anything. So, so when we got to Wolfenstein, it was really, okay, what are we gonna do? And we did have a group meeting where we're like, okay, what's the next game gonna be? And Tom, who was normally the creative director guy, we knew we were gonna spend a lot more time on this one, so we wanted to make sure that we had a really great idea. And he came up with an idea for a game that he wanted to call It's Green and Pissed. And it was basically, how about, there's a research lab with scientists you have to rescue, and there's mutants all over the place, and you're just like blowing them all away and saving the scientists and stuff. And I'm just like, that's like the most boring, seriously, like how many movies are like that? Like everybody knows this. This is boring for people that are gonna come into it. We need to do something, at least today, that would seem more original. And then, and I don't know why, but I just came up with the idea, how about we just remake Wolfenstein? Like that was a game 10 years before that was really amazing on pretty much all platforms. Why don't we do a 3D version of Wolfenstein? Like, that was a really great game. We all, and the funny thing is, id Software was just 4 of us. And one of us, Adrian, the artist, wasn't a computer person at all. So he had 10 plus years of doing art, but he had no computer experience. But all the other 3 of us, all 3 of us were programmers for a decade on the Apple II, and we played everything. And we all loved Wolfenstein immediately. Like, we knew, like, oh, that's the answer right there. So it was like, that's it. So we kind of knew instantly what direction we should go, and then it was up to Tom to basically come up with a big list of all the things we got to make. And then John was like, okay, we actually started making Wolfenstein in EGA, and then we converted it to VGA when the publisher that we were going to go through just said, forget EGA, it's dead. VGA is the new hotness. So that's what we did. But the idea was a group meeting. But it only took, I don't know, an hour to just get through the whole rejection and acceptance of the new thing. And we even decided, like, we wanted to remake it, but we weren't going to take the name Wolfenstein because we didn't want to, like, get into this legal thing. So we started to come up with a bunch of other names for the game, and we couldn't come up with anything that sounded cooler than that. And so we basically went and found out how to track it down and buy the rights to the Wolfenstein name. From the company that went, basically bankrupt. It was like 8 years prior, but we got it and decided to just, do it. But it was only like an hour, and I mean, Brenda and I will have design sessions where it could take 11 minutes and we know the whole game. It's like, okay, let's come up with something, and we just go bounce back and forth. Okay, it's done. 11 minutes. It's a whole game that'll take us probably 8-9 months to make. But a lot of times, it's like, what is the tech? What is the new thing? What is the idea? What are we doing in it? And all those things kind of happen all at once. So, but the inspiration is always like, I want to make a new game, and you kind of have an idea of what you want to play, and you just start playing with that idea until it gets to something that you're real excited about. But while you're making the game, for example, in making levels for Doom and for Quake, I basically make my environment reflect the way I want the player to feel when they're in this world. So I would have the lights down pretty dim. I would play something that was supposed to match the feel of the gameplay that I wanted. So if there was a fast level, I would, I'm always pretty much back then played a lot of heavy metal. So I would play some heavy metal for some of the Doom levels. And then with Quake, kind of the same thing, but probably more Queensryche, early Queensryche stuff. But basically just sitting there with real dim lights, awesome music, and trying to basically make a little piece of a level, run it. Does it feel epic? If it's supposed to be an epic feeling level, does it look really cool? Modify it. And the other thing is we use 2 computers. So one of them we were actually doing the level editing and programming on, and the other one was the stupid DOS machine that just ran it. So we actually used Next Step as the platform that we developed those games on, and the games just ran on DOS. So we would have them both going at the same time. So basically making a level, save it out, and then just reload it over here on the DOS machine and see if it feels right, if it looks cool, or if it's the thing I'm seeing in my head is happening correctly. And just like the levels are made iteratively, constant play of the levels and iteration on them as it's starting to get bigger and bigger, not just I spent 5 hours and I'm going to press the compile button and see what happens. You know, it's just like my programming. Like, you know, write a couple lines of code, compile it. Does it run? Does it work? Okay, cool. No debugging involved. Next, you know. So it's like the same iterative process in programming I use in design, in setting the tone and the sound and the look of the whole room to match the, I guess, the feel of what the player should be like feeling in the game.
Thanks.
Hi, this question is for Brenda. I'm a big Realms of Arcania fan.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Is that unusual?
In America, yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
it's
so
a
it's
really
Like
big.
a German.
Yeah, it's a huge German series.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't hear it as much as I hear Wizardry, for sure.
Well, anyway,
It's a more hardcore RPG, so my hat's off to you.
that's where this question is going. I'm curious what your favorite modern RPGs are and how you feel about, I guess, the progression of the direction modern RPGs have taken since like the Surtech and SSI days.
You know, it's funny because when he was, so this is not surprising me, half answering the question to begin. When he's talking about his games, I'm realizing, like, if you ask me a question about a game that's released, I can talk eloquently about it. If the game is still fuzzy in my head, I sound like a moron, right? Like I don't know how to talk about something that's not done fluff weirdness. So Realms of Arcania, I will give you a good answer about that, hopefully. I remember when we were doing Wizardry 8, and this is the point in time where we're starting to see, you know, Evercrack and Asheron's Call show up, right? And understanding how do we bridge from this single-player RPG into a multiplayer RPG, like a world where you have one object that 50 people are all going to get, and how wouldn't this wreck the story? Like, this is pre-MMO thoughts, you know? And so that was one school, one path that people were going on. And we were aware at the time of, obviously, Ultima Online, right? And those games felt, I guess, lighter in some sense because they couldn't be as deep because it wasn't one person calling all the shots. You weren't controlling a party of 6 characters, you know, like 6 of you have to get together playing D&D and make sure that your party's really well balanced, that you are all very much specialists. You sort of end up being this, you end up being this generalist, right? A mage who can somehow hit people. Like anybody who knows, like a proper mage will die if you breathe too close to them, right? Like there's 2 hit points tops. And I remember as RPGs were, you know, hardcore RPGs were going downhill. And well, you know, companies were folding left and right, you know, SSI and, you know, just all these series where people weren't making hardcore RPGs anymore. It was basically Surtech, and then we were up against, you know, the Bioware guys, right? They were making Neverwinter Nights then. And Tom was, in fact, making Anachronox at the time. And I remember just feeling like this sense of dread, like, no kid, like I'm fucked, right? I've only made hardcore RPGs my entire career. I'm never going to be able to get a job because nobody was making RPGs. And in fact, Surtech, you know, I don't obviously know any of the math behind the scenes, but Surtech was having difficulty finding a publisher for Wizardry 8, which went on to win 5 RPG of the Year awards. It was a good game. But they were having difficulty finding a publisher. Now, I don't know if they said, like, yes, we would like to publish the game, and we would like 95% of everything you make. Like, I don't know what they were asking for, so there may have been more to their difficulties than that. There's a guy with a Doom shirt. It's probably my question, by the way. I'm kidding. But I remember having this feeling like RPGs were just like adventure games died, that RPGs were about to die. And then this game came out that hardcore RPG designers made fun of. Now, I will say it now, but I bet none of the other hardcore RPG designers will say it. It was this stupid, simplified, ridiculous RPG called Diablo, which wasn't really an RPG, right? Like, it was so light and ridiculous. You couldn't actually, it was just sort of like a, you know, it's just, you know, slam the button. Like, how do you possibly take encumbrance and click, 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 right? And I remember people mocking it, right? So, you know, mocking this game. But Diablo probably saved my career because suddenly RPGs were made accessible to everybody. We had sort of delighted, I think that the mistake that many hardcore RPG designers made is that we delighted in the difficulty and challenge of our games. That's right, you go down into the dungeon unarmed, it serves you right to be dead, right? I mean, we used to, like Wizardry 1 through, maybe we stopped being quite so mean in 5, but maybe not. Like if you tried to resurrect your character twice and the second time failed, it was erased from the disc. Right? And like I remember like opening the Apple II drive, like, and you'd see ashes and you'd yank the disc, right? Like you had to get good at, that was the first physical games that I really got
Well,
into.
Castle Wolfenstein did the same thing too.
Yeah, so you know it's.
If
But
you got caught, it would instantly erase your thing. You had to flip the drive cover as fast as you could up, so it wouldn't delete your character. You just got caught.
And so there was this. We basically made our market smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, and then Blizzard, through the amazingness of Diablo, made role-playing games very accessible to everybody, and obviously WoW made games even more accessible, RPGs. But I would say, I feel still RPGs could be made much more accessible. I look at the difference in WoW's subscriber numbers versus Minecraft's numbers. And it's basically the same mechanic, right? It's about building. One is building a world that's very accessible and you can just go in and create and have fun. The other's about building a character. But I think we still have a ways to go. I do miss the old hardcore RPGs, and I'm grateful for indie game makers that are making difficult RPGs. I started a group of students at UC Santa Cruz who had never played D&D. I got them started on the white box. Actually going back to the as roots as you can get with the white box of D&D. We recently picked up a copy of Chainmail. Oh my God, I totally can't wait to play that. I've never had a copy of Chainmail, I just knew about it. I don't know, I feel like RPGs are probably in the best place that they've been in ever, right? There's RPGs that you can play if you've never played an RPG and you don't even know what, when I talk about encumbrance, you have no idea what I'm talking about. How many people in this room know what THAC0 is? Oh, I'm at home among my people. But yeah, yeah. So I love that there's games for us and that there's a market for people like us. But I also love the idea that there's RPGs that we'll call them the gateway drugs that'll eventually get people in there. So I actually think RPGs are in a great state right now. I would love a few more RPGs where you actually controlled a full party of characters and you had that opportunity for specialization, but that's what they make D&D and big long tables for.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, so as parents as well as designers, I was kind of curious how you balance exposing your kids to the games that you've worked on, but then also managing, when's the appropriate time to reveal a mature game or something with content that you don't find entirely suitable. There's a lot of discussion about that going on right now in the industry, so I'd like to hear both your answers.
I haven't made anything that I wouldn't let my kids play, so they played everything.
And Doom, it's funny, so Doom, if you look at it now,
cartoon,
it's
so.
really cute. Right? We had, so Avalon loves Doom, she's 8. She loves Doom, and she's insisting that she can play Quake now. But John was playing Half-Life 2, and we didn't know that the girls were there, and they ended up having nightmares, right? So that didn't go over very well.
Yeah, we don't go to Ravenholm. I was playing through there, and they were watching, and it was terrifying. And but that was probably like 2 years ago, and now Donovan, he started playing Half-Life 2, and he loves it, so he's not afraid anymore.
I mean, I think it's.
But we don't make games that we wouldn't let the kids play.
I mean, there's obviously some content that's. There's some content that is, I know of one, there was one thing, oh no, I'm not going to repeat that, that's way too much. But there was one kid who was playing a game, not ours, and there was a joke in there, I think it was Tony Hawk, and so this little kid came in and didn't know what he was saying, and he's like, this is a sausage fest, right? And the parents were like, I'm sure they said some parent, oh my God, or something like that. But yeah, I mean, the games that they play, so we have it locked down pretty well. Like the sign of an infraction, we're both very technically savvy, and the kids know they can't get away with anything. We introduce them, they all want to be game developers, right? So we introduce them to games and we have design discussions about it. Donovan does a ton of reading. I mean, he's basically taught himself a lot of server stuff through Minecraft.
Yeah, they actually, YouTube is great for that. They just watch YouTube videos all the time about games, YouTube game videos, Lego, Minecraft, World of Warcraft. They just watch videos about the game that they love, and they just learn tons of stuff from watching videos constantly, like tons of videos. They kind of self-teach themselves through video. It's kind of interesting.
If it's a game that you would think like, geez, would they let their kids play that? That's really objectionable. Probably.
Like Saints Row the third or whatever.
Oh yeah, right. So that was like Santa showed up with that, and that got yanked pretty quickly. So I mean, we'll do that. I think. I mean, as parents, we try to expose kids to way more than that. Like we just dragged them through the MoMA, and I don't think they were in the MoMA for 2 hours, and I don't think they got it. We did this. Me and John and Jordan Mechner and Rob Pardo had a game barbecue for our kids, so that our kids could meet other kids who were game developers. And they didn't care. Like I'm thinking, like if I were a kid, oh my God, that's the guy who made WoW, and they're like in the pool, ha ha ha, they just. There's a guy who made Karateka, who cares? It's. So we try to expose them to a lot of stuff. If they have questions about games, they probably get way more of a detailed answer than they'd want. But yeah, I don't know. I think we're pretty good about controlling the content they get. They don't, in our house, there's no cable TV. And they have, we demand that they read. We ask them, right now they have to write a report on the artists that they saw at the MoMA. Pick an artist that they saw. So anyway, yeah, I think we're really good. And, we take them through the country, and, we just have finished this massive family 3-week road trip where they had to learn all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, but we watch what they play, and we know the games that they're playing.
They get away with nothing.
Yeah.
So we think. They're probably out there burning things down right now.
They don't say anything that makes us think that they're
Yeah.
watching or playing anything that they shouldn't.
They did once, and that's how YouTube came to an abrupt halt.
Yeah.
I
That's so
I
true.
realize on the line this might sound like an interview question, but for each of you, if you could pick an IP, a book, a movie, anything that either hasn't been made into a game or has been made into a crappy game, and you were going to make it into a game,
Breaking
what would
Bad.
it be? And
I want to make Breaking Bad so bad.
I would make Deadwood.
Oh God, Swearingen would be a fabulous character.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Breaking. So we actually consulted with AMC on The Walking Dead, and I probably didn't make it through a week without going, so seriously, why aren't you guys making a Breaking Bad game? Like, yeah, I love that. But yeah, Deadwood's great too.
what would those games be like?
Deadwood. If I was going to make Deadwood, it would probably be. Definitely character based, because that's what those shows are. They're all about character and really realistic Western setting. The way that Deadwood is. So I don't want to be in the world of in that town in 3D and kind of really experience the rain and the mud and just the people and the constant new characters coming in and characters getting killed and eaten by pigs constantly, and just the devious political interconnections between the characters, and somehow I don't want the player to be kind of get into that, somehow become a character in the game, and it might end up having like generative story created for the character and maybe even the others. So every time you play a new game of Deadwood, everything has been kind of randomized because it's all generative storytelling and stuff. So it might be something like that. And you should be able to kill people too if you decide to kind of, like Fable, you decide to kind of go on the dark side of Deadwood and be a right-hand man for Swearingen and take out Dan and you burned your spot or whatever. Like, all kinds of ways it could go, but it'd be something I'd want to be able to replay over and over and over, which kind of requires randomness.
So with mine, AMC could care less about my fascination with this, right? Which is actually, they're like, well, if you want us to contact you, but I started thinking with Breaking Bad, that whole world I think is incredibly interesting. but I wouldn't want to just make Meth Tycoon, which is effectively what Breaking Bad is. And that's incredibly boring to me. But what is super interesting, so here's what fascinated me, and I, as many game designers, a huge flaw of a game designer, or I guess one of our strengths, depending on your relationship with that person, is we become insanely interested in something we don't really need to know about. And so when I became insanely interested, like, oh, this is fascinating, meth, interesting world, and it's also part of my research just on Mexico, I started looking into this, the current head of the Sinaloa cartel, right? So this is a guy who you could say he's illiterate, born into incredible poverty in this tiny little town in Mexico, and he's the 4th most powerful person in the world, while people are trying to kill him. So you can say he does horrible things. Yes, I get that. So let's just put these in a horrible thing box over here, right? But he's illiterate, and people are trying to kill him, and he's the 4th most powerful man in the world. Like and he brought electricity to all the towns. He provided schools. He built hospitals. He provided help where the government that you couldn't trust anyway wouldn't. And so there's this incredibly interesting interplay, like, what a horrible, amazing, nice guy. Gross, right? And so I'm fascinated by what is obviously not a simple system, right? The whole Breaking Bad, like, Meth Tycoon is easy to me. Like, I can just totally see that. But imagine, like, these Methville, right? These towns in just what must happen in not just Mexico, right? I mean, the same thing happened with the Medellin cartel in Colombia, but just the give and take, or even the story of the mafia is very similar. So this interesting give and take between the people who do horrible things, but also the lines they have to walk, the good they must do in order for that, and so that fascinates me. And I've read so many books on Mexican cartels, which probably terrified me more on our vacation and made me feel safe more on our vacation when we went down, because I knew a lot, so I didn't feel scared, particularly where we went in Mexico. But at the same time, it was really fascinating to be there, and I think it's an integral part of the culture. So that is where I would want to make the game, somewhere in that. So Breaking Bad, this is probably the reason I don't need the IP, right? And I'm also not stupid enough to go like Sinaloa Cartel, the game. No thanks, right? I don't want any part of that. Anyway, that's what would be interesting to me.
Cool, thanks.
So we have under 20 minutes left, so we're going to valiantly try to get Brenda to...
Hey!
No, I understand. But so we'll try and get through as many as we can, and then obviously we'll talk about where we're headed next. So go ahead.
Hi, I actually have, an open-ended question for Brenda.
I'm going to be super quick, I promise.
So I don't know if you've heard, there's this blog called the CRPG Addict. It's this guy,
Yes.
playing in chronological order like every computer RPG ever made. I think he's up to 1989 now. But he had this really interesting write-up on how Surtech got started.
Yes.
And I guess I was just curious, like, what was it like working at Surtech?
Wow, that's an interesting question. On the one hand, it was amazing, because I was there for 20 years in total. I mean, to have like 20 years at a single game company is practically unheard of nowadays, unless you're at Blizzard, and you've been there a long time. So it was awesome. I mean, I got to be in on the ground floor of many things. I worked on the series that influenced the people who made Chrono Trigger, right? Like, that's crazy. I worked with some of the best people in the industry. So I'm super grateful for that, and to see the evolution of RPGs. So that was a great part of it. On the flip side, there were some parts of Surtech that were messy, right? They had a fallout with Woodhead, they had a fallout with Greenberg. They, in fact, had a fallout with David Bradley, who, I mentioned was my mentor. And as an employee of Surtech, I found myself in a very difficult situation of not being able to talk to the person, since he was now involved in this lawsuit, not being able to talk to the person who was incredibly influential in my career. And that's something I regret to this day. I was young at the time. I mean, I can imagine if somebody said it to me now and I was in a company, you can't talk to your mentor. Okay, right, I won't talk to him about this pile of stuff, but I'm going to talk to the guy. I'm sorry, I'm a person, he's a person, and we have a life outside of this, contrary to your personal beliefs. So there were some messy parts of it as well. that I wish didn't exist. But all in all, I mean, I think I'm shockingly fortunate. I grew up in a tiny little town where, no joke, there were more cows than there were people. And the fact that I got into the game industry at 15 is a fabulous fluke. You know, and I don't know, like I have these moments where I think, like, what the hell would I have been doing? Like, if I hadn't been making games, and I think I still would have. I mean, obviously a kid who's rewriting D&D books or Rollmaster books at 14's got a problem, right? So I think I would have found my way here eventually. You know, but it's great. When we were just back home, and I got together with a couple people, you know, a couple Surtech people that are still there. And it was awesome. You know, we went back to ground zero, you know, where Surtech started, and the other buildings are all still there. Yeah, I have incredibly great, fond memories, and I'm very grateful for the opportunities they gave me.
Thank you.
That wasn't that bad.
Yeah, my question is actually twofold. John, I was wondering if you autograph the book.
Sure, yeah.
And then, for each of you, this year at E3, what like really impressed you, maybe made you stop and think, wow, that's like.
So we didn't go to E3.
We didn't go to E3. And you know, it's weird, because so while E3 was, I'm sure things were happening there. I cared so much more about FTL.
Yeah, we have iPhones and iPads, and you know, that's kind of like the world.
It feels
for us.
to me that you know, when the big awards come out or the big announcements come out, you know, who's in the IGF, you know, who's at Indiecade, because that to me is where the super excitement is. That said, I was really excited. Our friend Kim McCullough, she's working on a game, Project Spark, at Microsoft, which I really like. I mean, you know, sort of let you build your own game, and it's aimed at, you know, people who don't necessarily have code experience, and that got a lot of buzz, and I was super happy to hear that. Our friend David Goldfarb is working on Payday, and I know his game, so you know, his game got a lot of buzz, right? So it was more this like, oh yeah, awesome, glad to hear your game did well. So it was much more of a personal thing than walking around the show and being like, oh, wow. And we'd seen a lot of the games before the show, but my excitement, like, I want to know, like, why won't the FTL guys give me FTL on my stupid iPhone, right? And it's good that they don't. Like, I have this love-hate relationship with them for that. But I'm much more interested in the exciting stuff that's coming out of the indie space that's just not at
Indie
E3.
mobile, yeah.
Yeah, and I had a somewhat went completely off on E3 this year at GDC. So I'm not going to E3. I'm not going to go to E3 as long as they continue to use women's bodies as advertising platforms. I mean, fuck that. I'm just not going.
All right.
Sorry, John.
Right now.
My question is for either John or Brenda. My question is, at what point in the development process do you begin to have the audio people work on their portion of the project? And do you get your composer and sound designer, are they official members of your team, or do you
Yes.
get them from an outside source?
So sound design is critical. Like, so Ben Prunty, the FTL guy, brilliant soundtrack. We listen to that all the time. And we fanboyed Ben. As soon as we played the game and we became obsessed with it, we found out he lived near us and we asked him to go to lunch. Anyway, the sound guy's got to be, you know, sound guy.
Sound is a third of the whole game, and you know,
It has
why
to
are
be
you
there.
programming and doing art, not doing sound? That makes no sense.
So right at the beginning,
You know,
they
you're
have
not going to
do that.
innovate in sound if you're not doing it from the very beginning, anyway.
You can always tell if a game has had sound added on at
Just
the
tacked
end.
on at the end, it's
You know,
garbage, yeah.
like Bastion. The sound design of Bastion is integral to just how great that game is. You know, if they hadn't worked that in at the very beginning, it would have failed. I mean,
So our sound people work at the company, and they
In-house.
spend a long time on all of the audio, and they try to create new stuff. Like on my MMO that I worked on for 4 years, that's 4 years of a programmer and a sound an audio director working to create a generative music system. So the game wouldn't have like pieces composed all over the place, but it would create music based off formulas and samples and stuff. And you know, you can only do that with time and doing it for a long period, you know, and tweaking it and modifying it and really doing R&D for years. And you know, that's super valuable to push sound forward. You're not going to do it by throwing in a bunch of WAV files and playing MP3. Like, that's just garbage. That's like I just learned how to make a game level.
Yeah, sound's got to be there at the beginning. And I know, are you a sound guy?
I'm a composer.
Okay, so the having worked with a lot of student teams, sound is this thing they think of approximately 1 week after their game was due. And it's unfortunate,
It's bad,
right?
yeah.
You know, so they end up just having this garbage sound pulled from the net that you know, the volume on this is here and this one is up here. But it needs to be there from the very beginning. Has
Okay.
to be.
So they're like in the think tank with you during the initial, when you're bouncing
Yeah.
ideas back and forth? They're-
Yeah, well, the thing is, you need to have you need to have all the sound as much as you can in there as early as possible, because you need to get annoyed at it. If it's annoying, you replace it, and you have time to get annoyed.
Right.
But if you tack it on at the end, you have no idea how many people will get mad at that little leaf crunch noise or footstep or something. You have no idea, and it's too late. Game's out, you know. Versus, you know, you're living with it every day. The whole dev team is hearing the game. Make sure the whole dev team is listening to the game too, not like turning off the sound effects and music. They need to hear it while they're playing it, and they need to really understand like what's repetitive and sounds bad. You know, oh, that loop is too short. It needs to be like a minute and a half or whatever. So it just has to be there. It's just like programming. It's like QA is sitting there living with the whole thing, and they need to comment on the bad programming, the bad art, the bad sound. You know, they need to, all of it needs to be there. You can't just think that tacking something on at the end is gonna be good enough for your game.
Or think that, like as a designer, I don't think that, you know, I've done some sound design, right, but I want that person in there with me, right? So
Yes.
I may think of, this is you know, this is the idea for the game, this is where we're going. But sound, like one of the biggest areas that people can innovate in games right now is sound, because there's so, like okay, so Bastion, there we are, next. You know, there's Sound Dodger, and there are some others, and those games are winning awards because they're playing with sound, and they're playing with mechanics of gameplay sound. And I think it's really the frontier, because so few people think to bring the sound person in very early. Like, whatever it is, we don't just want a soundtrack, you need to innovate in some way, find your place, and, you know, procedural sound, all these other things, what can you do? The stuff that Ben did, which he's been really open about, with you know, sharing his process, you know, making FTL, and he's done really well for himself. You know, FTL has sold a ton of soundtracks, and I hope it'll sell even more. But yeah, we're huge fans of that. The guy we usually work with is we've worked with him on a bunch of games now. Dren McDonald, he's based in the Bay Area where we are. But yeah, he was in house with us. So we're working on a game. He's there all the time.
With when we were working on the id games, we actually used Robert Prince as our audio guy, and he wasn't really contract, even though I think that we had a contract with him, but it wasn't like an outsourced kind of guy. He was kind of part of the team, but he just wasn't there, and so we would communicate with him the whole time, and he made audio the entire time that we were making the game. He just wasn't there with us until near the end, where all of the stuff that he had done, we could finally whittle it down with him there with us. But we also believe that, you know, sound was so important to the game that we, in knowing that he's not an employee of id Software, we basically let him keep the rights to all of his music that he made, and we gave him a really great royalty. So he made way more money than, like, you know, than any normal composer would ever make, you know, for making Doom stuff, because we gave him a percentage of the game, and not just like, here's your $5,000 or whatever.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
So it's a bit frustrating as a student to talk to veterans in the industry about, you know, how'd you get there? How'd you develop your instinct? And because the answer is, I don't know, I've got a gut for this. I have a great memory. You know, just do it. How do you recommend to develop that instinct?
Well, discipline and focus are the two #1 things it takes to actually make games. And the only way you're going to get better at making games is by making games. So you need discipline and you need focus. And discipline is just, I'm going to work at this time, and I'm going to work for a good chunk of hours, because you're not going to get anything done in 2 hours, really. You know, anything that distracts you will take is actually a lot more time than just the amount of time of the distraction, because you're forgetting things, and then you have to ramp back up. So it's worse. So you need like a good chunk of time, like 5 hours at least, to actually get good development time focus where you don't have IMs and emails, anything happening but that pure amount of time that you're probably doing a lot of programming research or whatever while you're trying to make things work. And you need to, and you need just like that list of stuff that has to get done. You just blast through that list. You make a list of things, not just what do I want to do now. You know, it's easy to take. Here's the game. The game is a problem that you have to solve, and everything inside the game are just smaller pieces, just smaller problems. And when all the problems are solved, the game is done. And so, you know, break everything down into problems, and those problems become just items on the list, and just burn down through all of those things. Do it in dependency order, and just hammer on them one at a time, and just check them off. You know, if you haven't done it for a long period of time, that's kind of what it takes to get that focus and discipline and making yourself do it for a certain period of time and just burning through these things. You'd be amazed at how much you can get done if you just hold to the list and get it, just march it down through it.
So I don't know, you know, like, I think it's okay if you don't feel like you have instinct, or you feel like you have a developing instinct, because I don't even care about my instinct anymore, right? I have tremendous passion to make games, and I trust that if I prototype something that's a piece of shit, it will let me know, right? It'll be like, wow, this sucks, it's no fun. Or, you know, I have friends who will helpfully tell me, like, no, I think that's a horrible idea. Like John, when he reviewed, it's my favorite code review ever, he was reviewing a piece of code, and he sat down, he was quiet for a while, so I knew he was clearly impressed with what I had recently learned, and he said, I don't even know how this runs. Or no, compiles. I don't even know how this compiled. And it was just so I know my friends will tell me, and so there's been times like I'll seriously feel like that I don't know what I'm doing, right? I'll see a friend a friend of mine will make something that just is humbling, just like, oh, that is amazing what you've just done there, you know? So like my friend Kim, you know, Project Spark, I look at that and I think like, why didn't I think of that? You know, like I worked on role-playing games for her, why didn't I think of what she did? And I feel this moment of just, well, I suck. You know, but I thought of other things, and there's a bunch of game designers who, you know, if I listed their names, you know, we travel in a pretty small circle, and all of our friends are, you know, geeky like us. And the amount of times that I've heard very well-known game designers say, yeah, I think I'm a fraud, I think I suck, I don't think I know what I'm doing. You know, it's pretty much everybody, right? So the good news is I think when it becomes a problem is when you think you do know what you're doing, and you think you do have the perfect instinct, and you know that what you're making is absolute and great. There are times when you're right on, that what you are making is great, and you're right, and you're totally going down the right path. I think that happens much less frequently than we would like it to. But most of the time, it's sort of this model where you're trusting that if you prototype it right, it will tell you the direction that it's supposed to go. And it's a listening relationship. So I wouldn't worry about it. I think that fear that you're not going to make it right is phenomenally healthy and necessary to be a good game designer. And I think it's critical.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so last question. This is actually for either of you. How do you establish genuine emotional involvement within the game that you design without being too cliche? Also, do you prefer more subtle storytelling, or do you infuse the emotional involvement within the actual game mechanics itself?
Yes.
Well, it depends on, you know, like you have to identify what emotions you want to put in the game and then figure out how are you going to support that. And you also have to think about who is the audience for that. Because their idea of cliche is not going to match like a different audience's version of cliche. So, as an example, there was this game Ravenwood Fair, which is a Facebook game, had the characters in the game getting scared at some things happening. Like I would basically make this, the idea of the game is that you are going to build a carnival. It's called Ravenwood Fair. You're going to build a fair in this forest. And the forest is scary, right? It's a scary forest, and this forest wants its land back. And so you're there hacking trees and kind of chewing through the forest, and the next time you come back in the game, the forest has reclaimed part of the land that you cleared. So there's this constant fight, and the forest is just kind of just malevolent and bad. So it's going to have, you know, crows squawking and flying out of it, ghosts appearing and stuff. And what you're doing is you're building, buildings that are fun, that have a fun value, and the fun value will attract characters to your fair, and they'll spend money on the things that you've built. But then they get scared by the scary forest, and so you have to figure out, how do I, you have to console them. So they scream and they run to your character, and you have to like click on them to say, there, it's okay. And like the audience that buys into that is the audience I designed it for, right? People that are on Facebook that don't have a huge amount of games that they've burned through, that they've seen stuff like this over and over again. This is like the first time they've probably seen this before, so it worked. And so it was just like a consoling thing. There's character getting scared, there's the player being consoling, or a protector that you can build in the game being consoling. And like, hey, you're caring for these characters. Not only are you kind of getting money from them because they're using your stuff, but you actually care about them. You need them to make your place come alive. And so that was just kind of built into the mechanics. It's just audio and some programming stuff, but to the players, they were identifying with the characters because they had names, and they kind of had story that was woven into the quests and stuff. And so they start to care about them and know their names, and they don't like them being scared, so they set up protectors, and soothing them was another thing that these players were used to doing to their own kids. And so like it already tapped into something that they kind of understood, and so that's not anything that any normal game does. And so I think that it worked out well because it was kind of a new thing. And fear in Doom and Quake and Wolfenstein is just like, that was some of the, other games have been scary games, but those were just kind of, mostly Doom and Quake were just constant fear games, just, and everybody's kind of taken that and run with it. There's Silent Hill and all kinds of stuff that's crazy. But fear is now very easy to do in a game. So it's the other emotions that are really, really tough to tackle and get in there, but you have to create characters and situations that the player can relate to be able to make them feel those emotions just the same way that movies do it. Movies do the whole setup, get the player invested in someone, and then do something. And so you got to kind of make the games kind of reflect the way that people are manipulated with movies.
If you don't, if you don't feel it, if you don't feel it yourself, the player's not going to feel it. And there was a term I used a while ago, like when I was working on Train, there was a picture that I stared at of these two kids, and I know what happened to these two kids. It's not pleasant. And so I stared at this picture for a long time. It was at least 45 minutes a day, every day, imagining they were my children. And it made me feel horrible. But it gave me a connection to the material that, understandably, the actual people who went through that, it's a molecule in a giant sea, what I felt. But if I didn't feel it, there's no way I can communicate it. And I think in a game, if we're just like, well, what could make somebody feel, what could make somebody feel hurt? Oh, losing their partner. Oh, okay, let's write that into the story. So these two people break up. Like, I don't give a shit, right? Like, if you see in a movie, ask yourself, like, what made you upset in the movie? And when I was working on Wizard of Yada, I remember this distinct time, I'm like, what's the worst thing I could do? Like, I want to get your attention. Like, I want you not to leave this game tonight. I don't care how late you've been up. What could I do? And I thought of myself as a player, like, what is the worst thing somebody could do to me? And I realized it was kidnap one of my characters. So it's like, take them. Like, what? And nobody had ever done that in an RPG. So I had, your character's gone. Or I did, like, and then I just kind of ran with it. And I had, like, monsters swallow your characters and take them away. And then you had to find the monster and kill the monster to get your character back. So asking yourself, like, how do you want the player to feel? And then really thinking in your own life, what has made you feel that way? In being like Marlon Brando, being more of a method designer, just immersing yourself as deeply as possible in the subject matter, or sharing a bit of yourself. There's tons of autobiographical stuff in games that is nicely masked in metaphor, not in necessarily just in my games. I know all kinds of.
Yeah, I mean totally. My games are me basically. Like the dark humor, characters, violence, all that stuff. I didn't make it because I was thinking of some other person making the game. I was making it because that's what I wanted to see. So, but yeah, if you're going to do emotion, you have to really work on it too, because it's not the easiest thing to do.
Thank you. So we're basically out of time. So first off, for those of you who are joining us for this Chicago Day of Game Dev Goodness, the next stop on the train is at Potter's Lounge, which is the lobby level of the Palmer House Hotel. There's going to be drinks and food provided by Casual Connect. So we welcome you to come over there. We want to thank Flashpoint for hosting us today and getting it recorded. So we're going to be working with them to get that up on our channel. I want to thank all of you guys for coming and packing the house and having great questions and submitting great questions. And most of all, I want to thank Brenda and John for coming out here and making the little detour to Chicago, especially because Brenda doesn't fly, so it's a big deal. I've known Brenda for, well, she's 29, so that makes me like 20. Like, we met when we were 5, apparently, for how long I've known her. So, you know, it's a real joy to have these two come out and, you know, give a different perspective, you know, of the industry and to give up their time. So, if everybody could just, you know, give them a nice little round of applause. Thank you.
I'm 46. I'm a proud 46. I say I'm 29 just because it's fun, but I'm very proud. I wouldn't want to be 29 again. I made a bad game somewhere in there, so I'll stick with where I am.
So I think that we kind of have to start working our way out of here, if I remember correctly. But feel free to talk. Feel free to move to Potter's Lounge for the free food and drinks. And then after that, everybody's heading to the Emporium, which is an arcade bar, to drink and play games. Because they have a whole bunch of machines there. And thank you again for coming.